Have you ever heard something referred to as like a disease of the mind? It's kind of powerful image, right?
Yeah, it really is.
Well, today we're diving deep into exactly that.
Okay.
We're looking at how casteism in India,
Right.
even though it's been outlawed,
Mm-hmm.
still persists as this like mental framework.
Yeah.
It's a way of thinking that has an impact on the entire society.
It really is fascinating how,
Yeah.
we often think about changing laws
Right.
and how that's enough to fix social problems.
Right.
But in this case, we're dealing with something much deeper.
Exactly. And hopefully by the end of this deep dive,
Yeah.
our listeners will understand a lot more clearly
Mm-hmm.
how this disease of the mind actually works.
Yeah.
And that term comes from the source that we're using today,
Right.
which is titled Caste, the Disease of the Mind Poisoning Society.
And the source really highlights how this
Yeah.
isn't just some simple social hierarchy,
Er.
right? The idea of caste, the mental construct of caste, is much bigger than that.
Okay, so it's not just about being rich or poor.
No, not at all.
It's about something deeper.
It's a whole belief system. It's like a lens through which people see the world.
Wow.
And it's how they see everyone else in it, too.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
Imagine if everything about you, like your worth as a person,
Yeah.
your potential, the opportunities you get,
Yeah.
imagine all of that was determined from the moment you were born.
Yeah. Wow.
That's the reality of casting.
That's where that quote from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar really hits hard, I think.
Absolutely.
He says that caste is not just a division of labor, it is a division of laborers.
Yes.
And to me, that's saying that some people, they're just born into specific roles.
Yeah.
And that's it, no matter their talents or aspirations or anything.
It really is, and that's what makes casteism so insidious, right? It's
Oh.
not just about overt discrimination. It's
Yeah.
about limiting someone's whole outlook on life, what they imagine they can be. But it's even more complex than that because this bias is often working under the surface.
Oh, okay.
It can impact decisions without people realizing it.
So you're saying that people could be making choices based on caste
Yeah,
without even knowing it?
it happens all the time.
Wow.
Think about it. Have you ever, maybe just for a second,
Yeah.
made an assumption about somebody just based on their background
Mhm.
or their name, where they come from?
Sure, I guess, probably.
You probably reconsidered pretty quickly.
Right.
But that first thought you had, that snap judgment,
Yeah,
that's exactly the kind of bias we're talking about.
that's a really good point.
Our source gives some really strong examples
Yeah.
of how this discrimination plays out in the real world.
Right, because it's one thing to talk about ideas,
Right.
but seeing how it actually impacts people's lives is different.
Absolutely. One of the most impactful examples is with education.
Yeah.
The source talks about how in certain areas,
Yeah.
bleat children. And just to clarify, Dalits are who used to be called untouchables.
Right.
They were subjected to the worst kinds of discrimination.
Yeah.
They still face major obstacles when it comes to education.
Imagine being a little kid, ready to learn,
Yeah.
and being told to sit separately
It's all...
or not being allowed to participate in some activities or even being verbally abused just because of your caste.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is.
It's not just an emotional thing either. There are real consequences.
Yeah.
The source mentions a study from 2018,
Okay.
and the study found much higher dropout rates for Dalit students
Wow.
compared to others their age.
So they're basically being forced out of the education system.
They are.
And that just keeps the cycle of disadvantage going.
Exactly. And I mean, education is supposed to be the thing that levels the playing field, right?
Right. It's supposed to be the way to break down these social barriers.
Exactly.
But how can it be the great equalizer if these prejudices are actively preventing it from working?
It's a tragedy, and unfortunately, it goes beyond just education.
Okay.
Access to even basic public resources.
Right.
Things like entering temples,
Yeah.
using community wells,
Wow.
even just being served at a shop.
Jeez.
That can be determined by caste.
It's shocking that people are still being denied these basic rights today.
I know.
I'm remembering that horrible incident back in 2019.
Uh-huh.
A Dalit man in Gujarat was beaten
I remember that.
just for trying to enter a temple.
That's terrible.
It makes you wonder how deep these prejudices must be
Right.
for someone to use violence to enforce them.
That incident shows just how ingrained these beliefs are.
Yeah.
And of course, there's employment discrimination, too. You'd
Right.
think that with legal protections, things would be more fair.
Right.
But the truth is that caste still often dictates what kind of work is allowed.
Yeah.
And more importantly, what kind of work is expected.
The source mentions manual scavenging specifically.
It does.
And that's
It's
honestly,
soulful.
yeah, it's one of the most dehumanizing jobs I can think of.
It really is.
And unfortunately, it's a job that's mainly forced on Dalit communities.
It is.
The data from the 2011 census is just appalling.
Tell me about it.
It showed that over 180,000 households are still involved in manual scavenging,
Wow.
cleaning sewers and handling human waste
It's terrible.
without proper equipment or safety gear.
Right.
It just shows how caste is still defining people's livelihoods even today.
Even in the 21st century.
It's like they're stuck in a system that won't even acknowledge their basic humanity.
It is.
And then, of course, there's the problem of violence,
Yes.
which isn't just discrimination anymore, it's physical harm.
Exactly.
The source gives a statistic.
Okay.
Over 45,000 cases of crimes against scheduled castes just in 2019.
That's a staggering number.
That's a huge number.
What's really disturbing is that a lot of this violence isn't random.
Oh, okay.
It's about punishing people who try to challenge the norms of caste. You know, trying to step outside the roles that society says they have to fill.
Right.
It shows the really punitive side of casteism.
Right. Yeah, I see that.
It's not just about keeping people down, it's about actively punishing them for trying to rise up.
It's like it's trying to maintain control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Through fear.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a grim picture for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
it doesn't stop with just like, the discrimination and the violence.
Right.
The source dives even deeper into how casteism is like
Okay.
a collective, like psychological thing.
Hmm.
It's not just actions, it's a whole way of thinking.
So, like, people might not even be aware of the problem.
That's exactly it.
Wow.
Imagine growing up in a place where certain beliefs about people,
Yeah.
about like social order,
Mm-hmm.
are so normal,
Okay.
so ingrained in everyday life,
Yeah.
they become invisible.
Wow.
That's how casteism works. It's subconscious,
Yeah.
shapes how people see things,
Right.
and influences their choices in all parts of their lives.
Mhm.
That makes me think of that quote from Arundhati Roy.
Oh, yeah.
She describes caste as the most sophisticated form of slavery,
It's powerful.
perfected and refined over thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
She calls it a mind game, where the jailer and the prisoner are both trapped. That's
Well-
such a good analogy,
It is.
because it shows how casteism doesn't just hurt the people at the bottom.
It doesn't.
It affects everyone,
Yes.
even the people who seem to benefit from the system.
It traps everyone in this rigid structure.
So can you explain that a little more?
Yeah.
How does it trap the people at the top?
Well, for them, caste gives them this feeling of being better than others.
Okay.
It validates their place in the world.
Mm-hmm.
They might not even see the advantages they get
Right.
or the inequality that keeps them in their position.
Yeah.
But believing they are inherently superior,
Yeah.
it limits their empathy,
Okay.
their ability to connect with people they see as lower.
So they become prisoners of their own privilege.
Exactly.
They can't see beyond the limits of their caste.
Oh.
Right.
It's like they're living in a gilded cage, but blind to the suffering that their privilege depends on.
It is. And the source even uses some humor
Okay.
to point out how dangerous this kind of thinking is.
I like that.
It's fascinating how jokes can reveal these uncomfortable truths.
They can.
Like, for example, the source quotes George Bernard Shaw.
Okay.
He said, "Custom will reconcile people to any atrocity." It's a stark reminder of how practices,
Yeah.
even ones that seem horrible to an outsider,
Right.
can become normal
Yeah.
to the point that people don't even question them.
It's like that analogy of a frog in boiling water.
Exactly.
If it happens slowly enough, you don't even realize it's happening until it's too late.
Right.
There's also this anonymous quote in the source.
Oh, yeah?
It says, "In India, we don't discriminate. We just have an unspoken agreement about who gets to sit where and do what."
That's good.
It really highlights how caste determines social roles,
It does.
but in a subtle, almost invisible way. It's like an unspoken rule book.
It is.
And if you step outside your assigned role,
Yeah.
people push back.
Or worse.
Exactly. And even comedian Verdas jokes about it.
Oh, yeah. What does he say?
He says, "We Indians believe in unity and diversity as long as everyone knows their place in the diversity."
He's obviously joking,
He is.
but there's truth behind the humor.
Absolutely.
It shows how conditional acceptance can be in a society shaped by caste.
Right.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
So we've talked about how this idea of caste works,
Yeah.
the subtle ways it influences people,
Mm-hmm.
and the awful impact it has on individuals.
Right.
But The source argues that the consequences go beyond just individuals.
They do.
It's about an entire nation's potential being stifled.
It is.
Casteism doesn't just hurt individual people. It creates these deep divisions in society.
Absolutely.
It breeds resentment and distrust.
It does.
And that makes it harder for society to progress.
Exactly. And the economy to develop.
It's like all this talent and creativity is being wasted
It is.
just because people are held back by their caste.
Exactly.
It's not just a moral issue, it's a practical one too.
Right.
But with this system so deeply ingrained, is it even possible to break free?
That's the big question.
What does the source say about that?
Well, it offers some hope.
Okay, good.
It acknowledges how entrenched casteism is,
Yeah.
but it also says that change is possible.
Okay, I like that.
It suggests a multi-pronged approach,
Okay.
focusing on education, media representation, and dialogue within communities.
Okay, let's break those down.
Sure.
Starting with education,
Yeah.
what does the source propose?
It says we need to rethink how we teach kids about caste.
Okay.
It's enough to just talk about the history of it or the
Right.
laws against discrimination.
Yeah.
We need to actively challenge those prejudices
Okay.
and promote equality from a young age.
Yeah.
Imagine classrooms where kids are taught to see each other as equals,
Right.
no matter their background,
Mhm.
their family name,
Right.
or their social status.
That's a powerful image.
It is.
It makes you wonder why this isn't already happening everywhere.
It really does.
What about the role of media in all of this?
The media has huge influence.
Right.
Films, TV, books, even social media.
Yeah.
They all shape how people see things
Yeah.
and reinforce social norms.
Right.
The source is calling for media platforms
Okay.
to be sensitive and responsible in how they portray caste issues, to avoid harmful stereotypes,
Yeah.
and instead focus on stories of people who've broken through those barriers,
But
people who have achieved things despite their caste.
So it's about changing the narrative,
Exactly.
showing that there are other possibilities,
Right.
and challenging those assumptions about what people from different castes can and can't do.
That's it.
What about community engagement? What can communities do to dismantle this system?
The source suggests that open and honest conversations within communities
Okay.
can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
They can help break down myths and foster understanding.
It's about creating spaces for dialogue
That is.
where people from different castes
Yeah.
can interact as equals,
Yes.
share their experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and challenge prejudices.
Exactly.
So things like intercaste marriages,
Yeah.
community events that bring people together from different backgrounds,
Right.
even just simple acts of friendship and solidarity.
Those can make a difference.
They can help bridge those divides
Exactly.
and create a more inclusive society.
That's the goal.
The source also emphasizes that change starts with individuals,
It does.
taking responsibility for their own thoughts and actions.
Absolutely.
There's that powerful quote from Mahatma Gandhi.
Oh, yeah.
He said, "No one can harm you but yourself."
Wow.
It really makes you think.
It does.
It's saying that when we perpetuate casteism,
Yeah.
whether we mean to or not,
Mm-hmm.
we're ultimately hurting ourselves.
You are.
We're limiting our own potential for growth and connection.
Exactly.
And that realization,
Mm.
that understanding that prejudice is self-destructive. That's a key step towards change.
It is.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play
We do.
in dismantling this system,
Absolutely.
however small our actions might seem.
Every little bit counts.
Yeah, it's about those small actions, right?
Yeah.
They can have a big impact in the long run,
Exactly. It's like a ripple effect.
and they can all contribute to this larger movement for change.
They can.
It's like they say, knowledge is power.
It really is.
The more we understand these complex issues,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to challenge them.
Exactly.
Not just in India, but everywhere.
And that's a key point.
Yeah.
We've been focusing on casteism in India,
Right.
but these ideas about social hierarchy and inherent superiority,
Mm-hmm.
they're not unique to India.
Right.
They exist all over the world in different forms.
So what we're learning from this deep dive
Yeah.
can actually be applied to similar issues in other societies.
Exactly.
That's really valuable.
It is. It's about recognizing those subtle biases,
Okay.
those unspoken agreements about who gets to do what, who has access to what,
Right.
who deserves respect and who doesn't.
Right. Right.
These things happen in different ways in different places,
All right.
but the underlying principles are often the same.
So this is a call to action for all of us then.
It is.
To examine our own assumptions.
Yes.
To challenge those beliefs
Mhm.
that create inequality
Mhm.
and to work toward a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. And sometimes
Yeah.
just being aware of these things,
Mm-hmm.
being able to name them,
Yeah,
that's a powerful first step.
it is.
It helps us to see things more critically,
Yeah.
to question those truths we've always taken for granted.
Before we finish up, I
Yep.
wanted to go back to that Indian proverb you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
The one about habits and chains.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It really resonated with me.
It is powerful.
It says, "The chains of habit are too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken."
Wow.
That's a striking image.
It
It's
is.
talking about how these ingrained beliefs, these ways of seeing the world, they can become so much a part of us
They can.
that we don't even realize they're there
Right.
until they're so strong that it feels impossible to break free.
That's the danger.
But the proverb also gives us hope.
It does.
It's saying that if we can recognize those chains early on,
Yeah,
before they become too strong,
Mm-hmm.
we have a chance to break them.
we do.
So as we end our deep dive into casteism, it's
Yes.
a disease of the mind,
Right.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought,
Okay.
a question to think about.
I like it.
What's one small action you can take today
Hmm.
to challenge these kinds of prejudices?
Good question.
Whether it's about caste
Mhm.
or any other system that limits human potential.
Right.
Maybe it's speaking up when you hear a stereotype.
Yeah,
Maybe it's learning more about different cultures and perspectives.
that's a good one.
Or maybe it's just being more aware of your own assumptions.
Those unconscious biases we all have, those are important to recognize.
The important thing is to start somewhere.
It is.
Take that first step towards a more just and compassionate world.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
We'll see you next time.